works, and it has much more use than this path would ever see. If we're willing to be a little broad in our thinking and how we design this, I think there's a much better ability to fit that path in and probably create a better experience for them too. You know, when you actually have that ability to walk right up to the water, when you have the little bit of dip and curves that are naturally in there because maybe you're avoiding a tree instead of having 10 feet clearance on either side of your path with nothing to obstruct, you know, a bike speeding along at 30 miles an hour that goes out of control, then, you know, I think you can have a much better path and you probably are going to be much more likely to be able to fit maybe, but you have to restrain the range.
This is my first look at these drawings, and I'd just like a little bit of interpretation. What are the blue lines supposed to represent, please? Could you comment on that?
The blue is more or less representing the idea that somewhere through here, you know, in this general vicinity, the development that occurs out here has to be able to access the highway through somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So more or less, these blue lines are saying, yeah, figure out some way in here that you might be able to route a road through that connects to the highway. These aren't specific in saying exactly that location or anything else,
Sure.
but just more or less representing the concept that you are providing that connectivity out into this area that would develop in the future.
And the dotted line is this?
The dotted line would be the path, right?
Yeah.
And we show that crossing over as
Right.
well and coming into this residential area so that these people can come over and access the downtown or access the park off the path system as well. Again, that's out of your comprehensive plan, so that's nothing we came up with, unfortunately.
Other questions? Yes.
In terms of a potential land use, the comprehensive plan talks about a parking ride facility. Is that a use that could fit into some corner of this, or just thinking about it?
Yeah, I think there are a number of places where that could work, and even whether you may want to consider the parking lot in the park itself as perhaps doing that, or maybe through some of the other development that occurs around here, there can be a few additional parking stalls added to some of the other development to provide that kind of use. That's something that I'm not sure if we would identify specifically where it would go, but would be something to put in the report as an idea. Makes a lot of sense. You've got a lot of people who are commuting to Madison, and you know, really, after this point here, this is where all that traffic comes together. So maybe up in here somewhere is where that might be located.
Mike, your space allocations for your different colors, is that by science or is that by, did you study the needs and say, let's put in 12 acres of this and 2 acres of that? Or?
No, we looked at, but none of these areas are particularly large, first of all. And so what we did is more or less look at what are the existing uses in here. And a lot of this already is commercial. There's only a few locations that aren't developed. And although a lot of it is underdeveloped, there's a lot more opportunity to put more in there. So we started from the base of saying more or less commercial. And that is another thing I didn't mention. We had conversations with a number of the property owners and business owners, and most people told us that the uses that are there are the uses that people want to see remain. They didn't want to change over from commercial to residential, or from residential to commercial, or either way. So there wasn't a lot of demand to change zoning throughout this district. So we more or less kept that in place, but tried to look at instead of the zoning, what's the character? And as I was saying before, up here in the highway zone, you've got traffic that's leaving town, speed limits are getting faster. These are the kinds of locations that are going to be auto-related businesses, the service stations and other things like that are going to want to be in this area here. And that's a different kind of design necessary for those kinds of uses than down around the business area, where you might even see mixed use, where you might, or the downtown business district rather, where you might see some mixed use, you might see more office uses. And so that could have a very different character. And then you've got this stretch again in the middle, which is kind of, maybe it's a little bit of a both somehow.
You interviewed or talked with the current landowners and business?
We had quite a few that, one of the other planners who was working on this project, Sarah Malik, spent a couple days out here and talked with a number of them and also talked with several of them over the phone and compiled their comments for us.
What was the, I mean, obviously, we're talking about change here. What were their responses to the idea of change?
With a couple exceptions, we had the impression that people saw this not as, it's from working in a lot of communities, sometimes these kinds of planning projects come across as the city is trying to force people out. And that was not something that we got. We had a couple of people who acknowledged, for instance, that their property might not be the best one on the strip. But there wasn't the sense that this was an antagonistic project. This is, I think, viewed by a majority of people as visioning for the future. And people recognize, again, you may have a small building on a large site, and there is an opportunity to put more on there. And so, how will that happen? What might happen? I think those are questions people want to see answered. And certainly a lot of people, property owners and business owners here too. So I hope if anybody disagrees with me, they'll speak up.
Many of the people here tonight are property owners on Union Street. Maybe we have a couple. I'm sorry, I don't know you gentlemen. Which property?
I'm Maury Adams, my son Maurice, my brother Steve, and we own the property where H&R Block is. And I actually called up, I think there was 2 days scheduled, and I called up one of those days and said we'd be available that day or the Wednesday, whatever it was. I think it was 9th, 11th, and then I talked to somebody, they were going to get back to us and never did. And then we got this letter saying that, so, I mean, we didn't have any input. I don't know what input we would have given, but we really, nobody contacted us after we tried to get the meeting, so what that's worth. So I don't know what percentage of people actually had input. At that point in time, I don't know what we would have said, but we were kind of surprised when we got the postcard that, you know, it had gone this far, but that's what.
Well, I'm sorry that happened. You certainly have a very important parcel in the TIF district, and we certainly want your input as to what your plans are and what sort of opportunities you would like to see created there. I'm sure that Mike and the staff will follow up with you. Thank you for coming today.
Sure.
Yeah, I know your name was on the list, and I thought that Sarah had talked with you, but I'll check into that and we'll figure out what happened.
Could I ask what your opinions are to this area and your, I don't know what the word is, your vision for the future of your property? maybe it's to leave it as it is and then things are going well with how it is, or?
I would say that we're open for, suggestions. We bought the property with existing buildings, and we've remodeled them to a certain extent, but we realize it's not the highest and best use. We also realize that with professional planning, it should be more than just what the existing businesses want. I would expect more, direction and coordination and image building for the city and all that sort of thing. We would try to do our part, but this is just our first glance at it.
Understand.
But that's what I would think. This is an opportunity, and everybody should realize it and try to work together. I don't know what the time frame would be here, how long it would take to absorb these different categories of use, but it has to be a lot of cooperation from everybody, the city too, as far as working with people. But I would like to see an overall plan coordinating things, and I think that if it made sense economically, from a business standpoint, most owners would try to go along with it,
Appreciate your comment.
Okay, Mike, where do we go from here?
Okay, well, I think the two things we want to do are discuss land uses and discuss design. And maybe we ought to start with the idea of land use. And when you look at these two different concepts here, again, the differences mainly are, I just one earlier, this residential area here, because we did speak to one or two of the owners there who said they wanted that to remain. And I know there's also pressure to change that. So that is one area where there is a bit of a conflict going on. The idea of the light industrial, what do you want to see happen with this? Is this something that may be expanded, or should it stay more or less as is? Or, theoretically, I suppose you can talk about it going away. And then over here, when you look at coming off of the highway, what would be your vision or your desire to see in this area here? The mix of uses, or more of a typical commercial with residential behind it. So those three things we would talk about, and also then where you want to draw some of these lines. What are the natural division points you want to create for the splits between the different character of uses, the downtown transitional highway? So does anybody want to start with that one? Share some thoughts.
I just have a question. When you're talking transitional commercial, what are you exactly talking about?
Those are uses that, again, going back to this, the highway commercial really is very auto-oriented. And the downtown commercial is much more the pedestrian-oriented. Somebody's going to park their car and walk into an office. And then in the middle here, you might have a lot of different kinds of uses. You might have restaurants, you might have offices, you might have some retail activity. Really could be a combination of things that could be located in this area that, as we looked at it, we didn't think it was appropriate to continue this very downtown style all the way through this district here. In part because of what's going on when you look at the undevelopable area around the intersection here, the undevelopable area around the wetlands that are here. That already breaks it up with a lot of open area in between. And so thinking that maybe there's some relaxing of that standard, maybe the buildings are still pedestrian, but allowing a little bit more of a balance between auto and pedestrian. into site design.
I don't know that any of us are prepared to say what we think the delineation should be or what the direction should be, unless I'm mistaken. Please speak up if you have an opinion, but I wouldn't know how to direct you to which area would be most appropriate, which concept would be most appropriate to use.
I go back to the discussions we had when they were redoing that Main Street intersection. And we need to get that neighborhood involved in any decision, whether it's mixed commercial or transitional wrapping around behind that neighborhood. I know that they were very vocal about the uses in that corner. So.
I'm sorry, which area are you talking about?
This over here?
Yeah. Next to the Citgo. Back up Main Street that way.
When you think of that area, which, you know, the residential south of the Citgo, Franklin Street, that area, there, I don't spend a lot of time in that area. My thought would be that there would be some pedestrian traffic from there going towards the park. And so we would need, I think, to enhance that. I work downtown and I live close to the downtown, so I spend more time downtown. And I'm continuously amazed at how many people, even this summer, with the sidewalks torn up, are walking and traveling on a nice summer afternoon or evening. There are a lot of families walking pedestrian-wise downtown. So I think we need to keep that in mind as well when we work with the area that we're talking about tonight.
And, you know, if you look at concept A, the area behind those houses is more, as I'm hearing you, is more daytime businesses and businesses done at 5 o'clock.
Yeah, and
Whereas with the
lower
transitional,
intensity.
it might go till 8, 9, 10 an hour.
Right, we're not talking about the same kinds of, like the Citgo with the bright lights and everything, but maybe like the medical office or the accounting office. Low intensity uses that really, they don't need the highway visibility because they don't rely on drive-by traffic and they aren't going to present the same kinds of conflicts. So we thought that, you know, they are compatible. If you want to have those uses and residential in the same development, we can do that.
Does our smart growth map indicate residential back in that area between, say, Union Street and Cemetery Road?
Yes.
I guess, to me, the thought here is as to how to proceed with some kind of design concept is to look at what the core of it is. I mean, it's Allen Creek corridor, so we start from the Allen's Creek and then kind of figure out, like you said, there's some treatment of Allen's Creek through the park, and then it kind of just takes its own character.
This is Dick Wolf of the Evansville Observer, and tonight is a Wednesday night about 7:30.